Hello.
Hey, Master Oliver, how you doing? I just put us on broadcast. We should be broadcasting and getting getting everybody logged in pretty quick here. We have we were way oversold on this webinar, so I'm really excited about doing this today about working with kids with autism. And we have Master Sanborn is also on our call here. She's hidden in the background there. There she is. She's coming in. Oh, she's got our banner in the background. Fallen over a little bit there. Hey, Master Sam.
I'm posting on mom sites today. And
oh, you're posting on mom sites today, so you're putting all that stuff up?
Yes, sir. Well, no, this is what I'm copying for the text to put on the mom sites.
Oh, okay, great. That's our banner, Master Oliver. You should be pretty familiar with that because we've got a lot of our guys, a lot of our members are using that. That same text for the testimonials and the features and benefits. So it just happened to fall on Master Sanborn while she was getting ready. So I guess we should get going. Let me see how we've got 39 people logged in so far. I think I should just get started. The number's creeping up, 40, 41, 42. So it's going up pretty fast. And again, we're pretty oversold. So hopefully we had enough space for everybody that was getting onto this. So let's get started.
And then you're recording here. Something to note, Master Moody, is if there's anybody that logged in to the webinar that you want as a panelist, you can promote them to panelists.
Oh, great. I hadn't done that before. Well, I've got some great panelists on. We're going to have Tracy Thomas joining us a little bit later as well. But you two guys are the ones that we want to have contribute. And, if you guys have any questions, you can ask questions. There's a Q&A box on your screen, so you can ask for or you can ask for information. I apologize if we're not going to be able to get to all your questions today. Hopefully we'll cover them during the webinar. We'll try to make sure by the end we cover everything that we're going to get to today. We've really got about 5 or 10 hours of stuff to cover in about an hour, so we're going to work on getting through all this. Okay, and really what this is
training session.
Yeah, right. I mean, it really could be, and we could do everything one-on-one. We already have somebody putting a chat on there. Oh, no volume? Well, we can hear everybody. So if you're having any problems with audio, I know because Master Oliver and Master Sanborn can hear us. I heard somebody that had a problem with the volume. I apologize on that. That is on your end. So if you have any problem with the webinar, you can click on the some of the audio controls and see if you can turn that up. There's also an option with the webinar to dial in with a phone number. So if you click on your audio controls, there's an option to log in, or you can stay on the video on your computer, but you can say, I want phone audio, and that'll give you a phone number to dial into. So you can enter the meeting ID and the participant ID. And then you'll be able to hear everything on your phone. So if you have any audio problems with your computer, get on your phone and look for those options. Unfortunately, I probably won't be able to diagnose. We'll have like 100 people on the call here, so a few of you might have some problems diagnosing this. We are going to record it, and I will. If we have a good experience with the recording, I'll push it out. I never guarantee the recording's there. That's why everybody should always be live on these kind of things, because then you get to experience the different questions and discussions that we're going to have live, get to ask questions live. But again, if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A as we go, and we'll try to answer them if we're not going to cover those things later. So let's get started. So a couple things, what I'd recommend everybody do whenever we do something like this is get a blank sheet of paper out and start a to-do list of things that you want to do after the webinar. There's going to be some things that you want to do on your mat, on your instructional floor. There's going to be some things you want to do in your business. If you're a martial arts school owner, I know we have some people here who aren't school owners. I'm mostly going to be focusing on school owners today. So if you're teaching for a school owner, you can relay information to them. If you're just here because you're a martial arts instructor, and not just, but if you're a martial arts instructor and you don't have any interest in the business, that's great. We're going to give you lots and lots of content. Some of the things we're going to be talking about from a school owner point of view. We've got people on the webinar that are from all over the world. We've got Australia, Europe, Canada, South America. So we've got a lot of people on here. So we're going to try to make sure we cover everything for everybody. I'm talking a little bit of fast, but anyway, back on that to-do list. Get a to-do list out and make a list of things that you're going to do. First thing I want to do is thank our sponsors. One of the sponsors, Go To Karate, who I do a lot of work with. If you go to this link, and it's down at the bottom of the slides too, they've got some special gifts and everything. You can get a free evaluation. They do online marketing for martial arts schools. So if you want to grow your school for kids with autism, without autism, that's a great company that we work with, that I work with, and that's one of our sponsors. The other sponsor here is Master Oliver's Martial Arts Wealth Mastery. And there's the website. We'll talk about that a little bit during the webinar, not a whole lot because we're going to focus on instruction. But these are our sponsors. Master Oliver, I was just mentioning our sponsor, mentioning Martial Arts Wealth Mastery here today. So everybody ought to write that down on their to-do list to make sure after the webinar you go to these sites.
Yeah. And just as a quick note, if you go to Martial Arts Wealth Mastery, no obligation, no sales pitch, whatever, you'll get a couple of free books and 3 hours of free online seminar content. If you're interested in work together, great. If not, it's some great content that you'll get for free. Again, no obligation on any of that stuff. Right.
Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. And wanted to mention a little bit about my bio really fast. I'm going to go real fast through this, and then Master Oliver, Master Sanborn, and Tracy, who's going to be here later. So I'm a 7th degree black belt. I've been at 8 schools, over 15,000 students and 1,800 black belts. You can see some of my books. If you go to Amazon.com, you can look at the author page and see some of my books. We just published one, Stories of the Black Belts, or at mastermoody.com, and taught a lot of seminars and instruction business, lots of stuff. And I'm one of the consultants for Martial Arts Wealth Mastery and Go To Karate. More importantly, though, for today, so I went through really quick here. More importantly for today, my educational background all dealt with really 2 main features, really dealing with kids and students in martial arts. And my Ph.D. in education was firstly in autism and martial arts. And all the initial research I did was on working with kids and seeing what treatments, how autism was treated in the rest of the world other than in martial arts, and then what comparative things we do in martial arts. And then the second one, which we're going to do a follow-up webinar, not a follow-up, but an additional webinar on bullying prevention in June. That was what my dissertation was about. So we probably won't have time to talk about that today, although it does relate a little bit to autism. So that's a really fast thumbnail. I wanted to say a little bit about Master Oliver. I appreciate him being here. He's a 9th degree black belt and a Grandmaster instructor, 6 schools, thousands and thousands. I couldn't count as many students as you've had, sir. So I just put thousands of students in black belts.
My estimate is 35,000 over the years.
Right. You've been doing a little bit longer than me. Not that you're older, but you are. Anyway, so he's the founder of Mile High Karate and Martial Arts Wealth Mastery and author of many books. The other thing you mentioned, sir, is some free stuff. They can go to martialartswealth.com/free book, right? And then get some of these books for free. If you haven't read those books, Mile High Maverick, it's going to speak to you. It's a really good book if you're a school owner, or if you're even interested in being one. And he's got his MBA, which is really difficult, from a really good school, Georgetown.
Actually, I've got my bachelor's from Georgetown. My MBA was here in Denver, but close enough.
Good enough. You had the Jesuits yell at you, so I guess that matters.
Yeah, you never wanted to have a class with a Jesuit.
Tracy's going to be joining us later. We'll talk a little bit about him. He's written many books too. 8th degree black belt. He's got 4 schools. And so the reason really Master Oliver and Master Thomas are here is because they're instructors, though. I know we've talked a lot about business. You see a lot about business from them, but they're going to contribute a lot today on working with kids and working with kids with autism, because they have had thousands of students. That means they've got a lot of experience, not just themselves, but training lots of instructors, which is what's key, because what we'll talk about is going to work in lots of different areas. Master Sanborn, I'll go quick for her. She's had tons of experience too. She's running one of the schools. She's the chief of staff for Karate Built Martial Arts, and she's co-authored one of my books as well. So we're glad to have her here. She's going to be contributing on some day-to-day stuff that she's working on as well. So anyway, let's get to it. I'm going pretty fast. You guys stop me if you need to. So let's understand, our goals here today are to understand autism. There's a lot of myths about what it is. We're going to give you an overview of what happens in the rest of the world. Now, this is going to help you in a couple ways. One is understanding how to deal with your parents that you're talking to, and some adult students that have autism. Understanding how it relates to how you can go out in the world and talk to community leaders, clinics, schools, and work with other groups, which will help your business if that's what you want to do. We're also going to learn some strategies and tactics directly in your school, so it'll help you when the students do come in. Somebody else is chatting. I just want to get this. Okay, so thanks. I appreciate it. People are saying thanks and everything on chat. So I probably won't answer all your chats because we got to keep the flow going. We got so much to cover. The real key here with strategies and tactics for working with kids with autism, if I could just say one thing and everybody left after this, was it's really not much different from good instruction in general. So when we cover what to do with working with kids with autism, everything we'll tell you is really about being aware of students and working, and everything we're telling you will make you a better instructor with all the rest of your students. So that's a really key point. So why be concerned about autism? I mean, do you have many of these kids? I mean, is it a big deal? So it does affect a lot of kids, and these statistics have changed a lot. I went through before the webinar, I taught a similar one a couple years ago, and this data was different then. The CDC, which is essentially the it's the Centers for Disease Control, they're based in Atlanta, they look at this, their job is to look at this data. They're really who you should look at for all your information on any kind of disease. If you have a parent of kids, you should look at data from these guys, not from data you get off the internet, unless it's from the CDC. But their data says that 1 in 59 kids has autism. And there's another study that was done in 2011 that suggests that it may even be higher. Remember, when people are diagnosed with autism, it's because they've got severe enough symptoms that they go to the doctor, that they seek out help. So that's the number 1 in 59 that you're seeing. See if my pen works here. So that's that number. But the number that they did in the study in South Korea, what they did was they gathered up kids that had any kind of symptoms, not that were really seeking help. It was even higher. It was about 1 in 38. So in other words, not all these kids were seeking help. And so what we think is that the number of kids that can be diagnosed with autism is even higher. The other issue here is parents really don't identify their kids a lot. So sometimes you'll have a kid that comes into your school that has a lot of these symptoms that we'll talk about, but they haven't been properly identified. And they bring in their kids to us because their kids are a problem at home. They're not paying attention. They want self-confidence. They want self-discipline, something like that. But really the issue might be related to autism, and they may need other help. Okay, and the key thing here is that kids with autism can develop normally. What's really important is that they get early intervention. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but if kids wait until they're 9, 10 years old, the therapies, which martial arts is a really, really good one, won't work as well. And I'm going to start with an example from my own son. And some of you might have read this in the email. My son was diagnosed with autism before he was 3 years old. He couldn't speak. He couldn't speak as late as 4 years old. And I was lucky enough to be aware, because of the martial arts experience and some mentors like Master Oliver, like Grandmaster Bill Clark, like some of the other instructors I have with the ATA, with other people that I work with, to have really good mentors in instruction, to be wondering what was really going on with my kid. So I was able to get him diagnosed with autism early enough and start the therapies, including starting him in martial arts. I started him with our school when he's 3 years old. All these things help them develop much better. If you wait until later, it ends up not working as well. So if you have a program like a younger kids program, some people call it Tiny Tigers, some people call it Little Dragons, this will be really, really effective for the kids at that age. So early intervention of any kind of therapy helps a lot more than later. Okay, so just in terms of research, I wanted to mention a couple things. There's so much research and so much misinformation. Just this last week, and this isn't misinformation, this is really good research. These 5 studies, there were 40 papers published just this last week on PubMed, and just 5, these are just 5 that I picked out. Family physicians' awareness of autism spectrum disorder. So these are just some things that I thought I'd highlight, that you're going to get tons and tons of information out there all the time, and there's going to be all kinds of information that's good and bad. Again, you want to look for information that has, that's from the CDC, that's from peer-reviewed journals. I've got that background of looking at that stuff, but all of you guys should be paying attention to really good information. For example, this one here, family physicians. This means that most family physicians don't really know what's going on. Well, that's a little bit extreme. They're not really judged to be adequate in terms of diagnosing autism spectrum disorder. Kids, girls generally don't get diagnosed really well. That's what these say. Childhood Autism Rating Scale, this was just this week, said that this was the best rating scale for kids with autism. And then this one was the one I wanted to point out, how much it costs. It costs parents lots and lots of money, without going into big details about it, lots and lots of money when their kids have autism, even if they're getting services from the state, which most parents should be able to get. So these are big factors that were just published this week. So the point of this is that there's lots and lots of research going on.
Yeah, Master Moody, not to interrupt, but
yeah,
let me be my usual contrarian. Most
sure.
of the teaching information that gets bandied around by what I not too charitably call the bozo explosion of coaches, consultants, teachers in the martial arts industry tend not to be very good. Is that a fair way to say it, Master Moody?
Well, and I think with I would say that's more than fair. And with our other hat on, where we'd spend a lot of time coaching schools in how to do their business operations, teaching them how to do their instruction right and fixing those things is really important. And that's what we spend a lot of time doing. And if you do that right, then your sales and everything else works really well too. And they're getting a lot of bad advice.
Yeah. But as far as in this context, specific medical information, teaching information, documented research, you and I and the rest of our team are unique in having an academic foundation, really looking at real research, not buying into old wives' tales and not sharing bizarre, undocumented information. And, even people that are close friends of mine that I like a lot, I keep seeing really bad information coming from them that's third-hand, anecdotal, not research-based.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because it's or they give information out just out of they make stuff up. And if you and I come from a point of view of having multiple schools as well, and not to belabor that point, but we've had to make sure that what we do and what we're talking about works in lots and lots of different situations. And that's a key point when you're listening to other people. You've got to make sure that the information you're getting is going to be reliable. So those are a couple of factors there, but yes, exactly, sir. Well, let's move on because we got a lot of stuff to cover. So what causes autism? I get asked that a lot. What's the one cause? And what really, it's a problem of a question. It's not, well, first we're going to go with who are the kids with autism. Sorry, I skipped ahead in my own mind. So autism spectrum disorder, before we talk about cause, is a spectrum of things. So when you're talking about what is autism, it's really not one disease. It's not like the flu where you have a particular strain of flu bug, or it's not like it's not like a unilateral or a uniform thing that people have that there's one treatment for or there's one diagnosis for. It's really a complicated diagnosis and a group of things that psychiatric professionals put together in one diagnosis. And in fact, they used to have something called the DSM-4. It's a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and it separated autism into a few different categories. Now, a lot of things are, and we'll talk about that a little later, a lot of things are all rolled up into one diagnosis of autism. So some characteristics of kids with autism are they have difficulty in social interaction. So this is the basic summary. They have difficulty in nonverbal and verbal communication, and you'll see repetitive behaviors. So here's the main gist of this. If you think that a kid has autism, we're going to show you some things to work with that'll help you be a better instructor. And you have to approach this real delicately with parents. What what we teach our staff to do is make sure that we're aware of these things so that we can be aware if the parent comes to you. Sometimes they won't offer up that the kid has autism initially. Sometimes they spill the beans and tell you right away. But if the kid is very severe, it may be something that if you're having trouble working with them, that you need to have a conversation with them about, here's some things that you may want to talk to your doctor about. And we don't tell the parent that we think the kid has autism, even though I'm going to educate you. In some ways, maybe more than a doctor would have education, a family physician, not a psychiatrist or somebody that's a specialist. But sometimes family physicians don't get a lot of education on diagnosing kids with autism. So it's something that they may need to talk to their doctor about. Here's some things that your kid's doing. This is a little bit atypical. We recommend that you talk to your doctor about it. And you have to be really delicate because we don't want parents to feel bad about those kind of things. So these are some characteristics that you might see, and we'll go into more detail in a second. So things changed a little bit with this this change from the DSM-4 to 5 to 4 to 5. This is really important because you've heard a lot of Asperger's syndrome. Some of you might have heard of some of these other ones, childhood disintegrative disorder. But Asperger's syndrome is a really common diagnosis. And technically, Asperger's syndrome doesn't exist anymore as a diagnosis. So you see even parents now, and even doctors, family physicians will diagnose a kid, they'll say he has Asperger's syndrome. That's not a diagnosis anymore. So that's something to remember. Not that you want to argue with a parent about it, but just so you're informed about what's going on. So all the old diagnoses that used to be kind of under that umbrella in the old diagnosis system went away. Go to the next slide here. Okay, another term you're going to hear is high-functioning autism. So like my son would probably be considered high-functioning autism. So this is kids with IQs over 80. So in the general IQ scale, they have an over 80 IQ, which is in normal scales that they don't have a special needs or an IEP at school. Sometimes they'll still have an IEP because of the other behaviors, but high-functioning autism would mean they probably would need academic help. Okay, so now we're on causes of autism. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So again, I mentioned it's not a disease, a specific thing that people are, a lot of people ask me about this very often, but it's a similar set of behaviors. So don't think about it as, in some ways, when even you say you have autism, it implies that you've got something specific. It's a group of behaviors, and it could be caused by lots of things. There's a little bit of genetic risk. It does tend to run a little bit in families. It doesn't mean if you got somebody that had autism in your family, you shouldn't have kids, because this amount is very, very small. It's very hard. They can't predict it like they can predict Down syndrome, or they can do tests and see if you're going to have a high risk of autism or anything like that. It's very, very small. But research does show there's a little bit of genetic risk. There's a little bit of environmental risk. And I want to talk about this. It's really just, the environmental risk is still based on genetics. So there's no research that there's any kind of toxins in the air or anything else that have anything to do with autism. Advanced parent age is the only environmental risk that really has a factor. Pregnancy and birth complications, and some pregnancy issues about pregnancies being spaced really close together. So those seem to have a small impact in environment. And then how you can decrease risk of autism. There is some evidence that prenatal vitamins do help decrease risk of autism. So these are some factors about risk. One thing I want to mention about no risk, and at the risk of upsetting anybody on the call, there's absolutely zero evidence that vaccines have any evidence or have any effect on autism whatsoever. Zero at all. There's a lot of talk about this, but that was from one study done by a guy named Wakefield, who's been completely discredited and tossed out of the medical profession. So there's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. So vaccinate your kids and look at real research on that. And that's the last I'll say about that. I don't want to upset anybody if they're in a different opinion about it. But as far as autism goes, zero evidence whatsoever, and that's very, very well established. Okay, so that's about causes of autism. But don't think about it as a disease, a specific disease that that somebody has. Okay. And I've got some people putting chat things in there. Please put them in the Q&A so that I can answer them properly. Okay, so let's just talk about some symptoms. And there's a handout that if after the webinar, if you fill out the survey, if you do the mobile survey, I'll send you a PDF on the symptoms that give you a lot more detail. So everybody should put on their to-do list right now, fill out the survey after. I'm going to send you a text of a mobile survey. If you didn't get the text, for the mobile survey, you can email me, and everybody should have my email address because you all probably enrolled from email. I'll mention it again later. But if you do the mobile survey afterwards, you'll get some extra documentation afterwards. So put that on your to-do list. So social challenges, these are some social challenges that that kids can have. You may have seen some of these already. I'm going to look at the Q&A here a little bit. The only Q&A I've got right now, I think some people are putting their questions in chat, is helping a student become a better instructor. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So social challenges, these are some things to notice. And a lot of this, you want to compare this to other kids their own age. So difficult engaging in everyday interaction. Some examples of that can be they're not talking to other kids. They're they may be speaking, like my son in particular, he was having trouble speaking, and he was talking gobbledygook. So he would speak, he would say things, but it wasn't intelligible. He also wouldn't, for example, do social games. He really liked doing stuff himself. He would do puzzles all day long, which was very convenient for me when I was working. So I didn't have to, in my case, it wasn't a hassle. But when you're observing a kid that tends to be a loner and tends to do things by themselves, that could be a problem with social interaction. One other thing that can happen with these kids is if you try to take them from a social environment or take them from an activity that they're doing and put them into a social environment, they can get upset. So those are some social challenges that they can have. And Master Sanborn, Master Oliver, chip in if you have some examples there. Usually when I teach this, there's they prefer to play alone. That's one thing I mentioned. So for instructors, go ahead, guys.
I was just going to say, Master Moody, I'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A.
You can do that? Okay.
So
I didn't know. Oh, that's right. You're a moderator, so you can see those.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Thanks. I didn't know I had you as my assistant this time, sir. So
we'll just reverse roles for a change.
Yeah, that's perfect. So for instructors, this means what you need to be watching is, back to the back slide. For instructors, we'll talk about this a little more specifically. But what this is going to mean is that during class, you may have trouble with this. Now, the nice thing about martial arts is in a lot of ways, we're an individual activity. They should just mainly be paying attention to the instructor. We don't have them paying attention. In most cases, it's not so much a group activity where they're doing stuff like they would in kindergarten or like they would in a circle time in kindergarten. So our activity tends to be really good for these kind of kids in that way. But we have to be aware of that and then try to find strategies. And we'll talk about the specific strategies a little bit later. Most of the strategies we're going to cover in a little bit. So communication challenge. We already talked about delayed talking. That may be an issue. They may put words in out of order, or they may put words in very strange sentences. So if you hear some of this, this could indicate they have autism. May have trouble sustaining a conversation, but that may be, they may look the other way. They may not continue a sentence. This is a common one, and this is one way that they diagnose autism, is a kid may be able to have a conversation with you one-on-one, but in another environment, they may have trouble recognizing somebody they're not used to in their body language or tone. And we know that 80% of language is body language, and 15% of it is tone and 5%, I can't remember, 10% is tone, 15% is tone, something like that. And then only a little bit is what you actually say. These kids have a lot of trouble with the rest of it. They can sometimes understand what you say, but they take what you say very literally. And because we're all used to what I'm doing with my hands, we're all used to tone and body language, and they're not able to understand it really well. This can be a big problem for them. So when you're instructing, when you're teaching, you have to make sure that you're very specific with them. Typically with kids like this, we try to make sure then that they're in the middle of the class in the front, so that they can see you and they can be really clear on what you're talking about. Okay, that's step number one. We're going to talk about some more later. So here's some really classic things that you hear people talk about with kids with autism. Hand flapping, they twirl, they start, they take a bunch of their toys and they arrange them a certain way, and they sometimes get upset if you rearrange them. There's a lot of, the general rules, repeating behaviors. There's a lot of things that they kind of call self-stimulating. So they're stimulating themselves. They're trying to cause a response by themselves because that's just how they are. So they may want things in a fixed order also in the day. So they may want things to happen during the day in a particular kind of order. So what this means for you guys, you may have parents that are very frustrated. Oh, I needed my kid to come to class and he didn't want to come to class. This is one example. And for a kid like this, they need to make sure that it's part of their regular routine. Now, later we'd like the kid to be able to adapt to other routines because that's the real world and that's life and that's how things are going to happen. But to make sure they acclimate to what you're doing in martial arts, we want to make sure the kid has a regular routine, so that helping the parents dealing with that is really important. Again, Master Sanborn, I think you've got a couple kids that this is really important for, right?
Yes, sir. It's also a case of if you change in the middle of class, if they have an expectation of what class is going to be, because you've told them you've done your goals at the beginning of class today, we're going to do this, this, and this. If you change that on them, on some of the really autistic ones, they will freak and just melt down in your class if you change things on them. Or at the end of class, if you're like, oh, now you're going to take another class, if they weren't prepped ahead of time for a change like that, a lot of times they just can't handle that and they will melt. So you have to really watch that kind of behavior with them, that you're not changing things on them when they're used to a specific routine or schedule, or they know in their head, this is what's going to happen. Okay, I could do that. And then you change it on them halfway through, they don't react well to that.
Well, and learning to manage that's important, I think, too, right? Because sometimes you need to change, or they may have misinterpreted what the expectation was. So if they get upset, then we make sure we don't be surprised if they say, yeah, but you said we were going to do this next. Okay. And don't get upset yourself about that. So there's both sides of this, because sometimes you may just have to change, or they may have thought something was going to happen when it didn't, or, you know, it may just have been something happened in the class and you have to rearrange things. But you certainly want to strive to make sure that it's regular. But also, what we want to make sure you understand with this is we want your school and operation to run smoothly. So bringing these kids in shouldn't disrupt all that. So if you do things right, you might get, I don't want to say a flood, but an influx of these kids. I mean, 1 in 59 kids have autism. Generally, we tend to see more than the average number of kids with special needs in our martial arts school if you're doing your job right and you have a good reputation. So you might have, 3 or 4% of your students that have something going on in this spectrum. And if that's the case, we don't want that to disrupt your normal flow. So just being aware yourself that might be an issue and being able to handle it when the things come up, I think, is what's really important here too.
That is one of the questions is how do you deal with keeping the kids mainstreamed with everybody else versus separating them and having them feel ostracized? And I've got some views, but I throw it at you first because right in there in our topic right now.
Well, I think let's talk about that now. I was gonna cover that a little bit later in terms of instruction. But I think we can talk about that now. I mean, really, well, you know what, if we can save that a little bit, Master Oliver, let's say, because I've got a couple other pieces that are going to go along with that. But absolutely, that's a real important question, and we want to make sure we cover it. So I'm going to go really fast through this next part, because this is what professionals look at. And if you like, I can send this to you. You'd be happy to look at, but what the professionals look at to diagnose a kid with autism. And you don't have to write this down. You can email me if you want. There's my email address. I'll give you guys a second to write down. It's pretty easy, senior.master.moody@karatebuilt.com. Karatebuilt.com is all over the place here. This is what a professional has to learn to diagnose a kid with autism. And this is, I'll just kind of go over the main categories. So these are all the deficits that they may have. Deficits in social communication and social interaction. So that's one thing they have to be diagnosed with autism. Okay. And then they have to have restricted patterns of behavior or interest. So there's a whole bunch of different categories. You can see they're very different. For example, it could be stereotype motor movements, or it could be, as we mentioned before, insistence on sameness. It could be hyperactivity or hyporeactivity, so they're not reacting to sensory input. So they could either react too much or too little to sensory input. What this means for us is noises. Sometimes these kids, if they make a loud noise, Master Sanborn shaking her head, nodding her head, because if they make a loud noise, they may react more, so we have to be sensitive to that. Or they may not react if you make a noise. So those are things. If you can see from this diagnostic part, it's a big range of stuff. One kid with autism is totally different from another kid with autism, both in terms of what their symptoms are and the severity. And some people would argue, in fact, they used to argue this a lot when they came out with this diagnosis, is, well, these are completely different disorders. These are completely different things. The reason this is important for it to all be wrapped together for the doctors is then we can get your kid's services. So really you want this to be all wrapped together into one model. Then when the particular kid has a treatment plan, it needs to be specific for the individual depending on what happens. So, but I'm not going to go through all the details of this. Again, that's what doctors have to look through. And they have to be present early. So it used to be that it has to be present before you're age 5. Now they just say early. In other words, if you start acting this way when you're 15 years old, that's something else. So they want to make sure it's not really autism if these symptoms come later. That might be because of some other kind of issue. And they should also cause significant impairment in one of these areas. So anytime you have, if you have a kid or one of your instructors has a kid, in fact, one of our instructors has a kid that needed to get diagnosed with autism. I say needed because he needed to get the services from Arizona that was available to him. So what I told him was that when you go to the doctor, don't try to be nice. Don't say, well, my kid's doing really well in those areas. That's a big, big mistake that parents make. They need to say, no, this is a big problem. So if you err on the side of saying your kid's capable and good, which we all want to do in some of these areas, then what happens is that you end up getting, you don't get the diagnosis, then you don't get the services. So to achieve the diagnosis, to get the diagnosis of autism, it has to cause significant impairment in one of these areas. Otherwise, the doctor cannot diagnose you with autism. Okay? And then here's some stuff. If it's one of these other things, like it's an intellectual disability or one of the other things, then you can't have a diagnosis of autism. So this is kind of give you a really super fast overview. We'd spend days and days figuring that out. But it's really important if you ever have a parent that needs to get a diagnosis. This isn't your job to do the diagnosis. Please don't try to do that. But if you ever have a parent that you're helping, or it's you, it's something to be aware of. This is some other notes in the diagnostic criteria. Okay, I'll skip this. And then this is just a table that they use depending on, now they have to identify how much severity these cases are. So they can still get a diagnosis if it's just requiring support. But some of these, if it's very severe, requires substantial support. Some of these kids need occupational therapy. They need help day to day. The parents need a lot of help in there. We've got a couple of these at our school that Master Sanborn's running. Well, at least one. Brady, right? I mean, so he needs some extra. He probably is a level 3 severity. So when we'll talk about the question that was asked before, how do you mainstream them versus not? Okay. Okay. One thing that's really important, very often they have some other medical issues. So very often there's a genetic condition. We've seen a lot of sleep disorders. This one happens all the time. And if they're not getting sleep, that color isn't very easy to see there, huh? If they're not getting sleep, then it's very hard for the parents to deal with things, right? I mean, if the kid's always waking up at night, that's hard for the parent. It's also hard for the kid. You guys all know what kind of issues you can have if you don't sleep. Pica is when they start eating dirt or poop. This is pretty common with kids with autism. Obsessive compulsive disorder and gastrointestinal problems, that's common. This is, by the way, why some parents think that a gluten, casein-free diet helps kids with autism. It doesn't directly help kids with autism. What happens is if kids have gastrointestinal issues because of other stuff, then sometimes that helps them with those gastrointestinal issues, so they feel better. So then they think that that cures autism. And then all the parents that have autism start feeding their kids better, or these kind of foods. That doesn't have any effect. If you want to do that, fine, it won't hurt, but don't stop doing the other treatments that you need to do. Actually, it will hurt a little bit. There is a little bit of research that parents that are doing a massive job without gluten and casein, they're restricting it completely. The kids are having smaller bone growth. And some kids with autism already have weak bone growth because of some of these other issues. So be really, really careful before you would restrict diet because you think it's going to help autism. There's no evidence that that helps whatsoever. And that bone growth thing is a concern right now. Doctors are having some problems with this. So very, very often these kids have issues with some of these other things. The Bostics, I don't know if they're on the call. I taught a seminar for them last year. One of the parents talked to me later. Kid had 2 or 3 other things go on, and it really makes it a little complicated for their treatment plan. So here's my opinion. I want to say this really quick. Parents sometimes worry about labeling their kids. My opinion, I was happy to get a label for my kid of autism. I got lots and lots of resources from the state. They covered his occupational therapy, his speech therapy. The school was more sensitive to what was going on with him. He doesn't need any of this anymore. He's applying for the Naval Academy. If you know anything about that, it's massively hard to get into. Only 8% of kids get into it. He does great in school. He's the captain of his football team and does track. So I could talk again and again, and I'll get emotional about my kid. He's amazing. These guys both know him. And you still can see characteristics of autism. He's one of the instructors at the school. Master Sanborn can say he does a great job. But we started early, and we started the treatment early. And one of those treatments is martial arts. So in fact, in my opinion, it's the biggest one. But don't restrict a kid. Getting that label of something, in fact, helps the kid. It helps them with the services they can get. And almost every state's pretty darn good about services. So treatments. Let's go through treatments really quick. I made some notes on specific treatments. These are some common treatments. The gold standard for treatment is this, called ABA therapy, applied behavioral analysis. And I point these out partly because a lot of this is similar to what we do in martial arts if you're doing things right. So applied behavioral analysis is by a guy named Lovas, and he's from UCLA. And this is about 40 hours a week. That's a lot of time. It's the best therapy that's ever been done for kids with autism. But a lot of people don't want to commit the time to do it. And a lot of insurance companies, a lot of state supported treatment won't cover this. Like, for example, my child got 10 hours a week of ABA. It still helps, even if they can only get 10 hours a week. What this is they bring what's called a habilitator in, and they do repetitive, continuous training on getting all of their behaviors moved forward better, better, better. So that's why it's applied behavioral analysis. They're using behavioral techniques to move their behaviors better. Guess what that's like? It's like going to martial arts. And you go to martial arts class, and then you improve every time. We're trying to get you more disciplined every class, as long as you commit to doing it long enough. And when these kids get to black belt, they'll be really good. Just like when they do this long enough, they'll be good. Some other therapies that you hear about, picture therapies. Some of the kids can't communicate, they can't speak, but they're real smart and they can point to a photo of what they want. So they'll use picture therapies to help them learn to communicate, and that helps them learn then later to talk. So these are very good therapies. A lot of the kids are in occupational therapy. They have sensory issues, so these are some other different issues. Nutrition therapy is usually for kids that have gastrointestinal issues at the same time. Medication, I wanted to mention, there's one drug, Risperdal, I'm pronouncing that right, okay, that does help a little bit in some severe cases. Mostly this is for calming down some of their sensory issues, but generally behavioral treatments are what helps with autism. So if you think that there's a diet or a treatment or some of this other, some drugs that the kid's going to take, unless they have ADHD, which is common also to have with autism, unless they have some of these other issues, medication is probably not what's going to be the best thing. Treatment. And by the way, this is why all these kids ought to be in martial arts. Okay? So, and I'm telling you this stuff because if you go to if you go to a clinic, which there's a couple clinics in town that I go talk at, and then they refer all kinds of people to us. All kinds of kids with autism and also kids with ADHD and some other issues. And they're pleasures to have in class because we know these kids are also getting good treatment as well. It's not just somebody that wants us to fix them. It's somebody that's got a good treatment plan that's coming from a really good clinic that we like working with. So if you know about this stuff and communicate with the doctors, even what I just told you today, it'll help you a lot.
And maybe Master Moody, to echo that, for my Mile High Karate schools, we've always had a very disproportionate relative to the population of kids on the autism spectrum, as well as ADD, ADHD, etc. Because I was actively seeking that out within the public and private elementary schools, within the clinics, etc. Because once we were trained a little bit on how to deal with this appropriately, we knew one of the very best things that they could do was to be trained in martial arts and get to black belt and so forth. And I see a lot of instructors who go the other direction. They try to avoid anybody who they think is going to be a quote unquote difficult student. But I think it's just the opposite. We have such a dramatic impact in a positive way that it's well worth seeking out.
Sir, I got to tell you, the ones that they get their black belt and you're in tears when they get, I was going to say almost, but I don't want to say almost, that you're in tears. Exactly. And the family's in tears. If I think about it too much, I'm going to be in tears now. But, I'm not kidding right now. Those are the ones that you help those kids. And you're 100% right. The difficulty instructors have is they have the wrong perceptions about it. I had one instructor who's a very, very high rank. I don't want to say who it is, but because they said kind of a negative thing when I taught this class once in a different venue. They said, well, I don't want any of those kids in my school because they're dangerous when they spar. Ridiculous. That means they're not managing the class well. I couldn't say that in that environment, but that it's a ridiculous comment. And what the issue is, what they're doing is they're having an attitude, but then they lose a lot of really, really great students and really, really great parents. Is it easy? No, but it's really rewarding, and it doesn't hurt you in the other parts of your business. Yeah. So it's going to help you, in fact, in the other parts of your business as well.
I would say actively seek them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Very, very good point. All right, let's move on. So what does a parent go through? I just want to mention all the stuff. Now, so look, I don't have any sympathy for a parent that says, oh, but we're so busy with stuff, I don't have time to bring them to karate. They've got to manage this because what we do is just as important as this stuff. I 100% believe in that. So you've got to motivate the parents to make sure that they take the time for what we do. Understanding, though, that they do have all these other things that they're doing. So making sure that you understand that some of what they're going through helps you be a little bit empathetic to what they're going through and communicate to them. So they have a lot of stuff. They've got to see a psychiatrist most of the time. In fact, they should, or a psychologist. If they're not seeing one of those and they're just going to a family care doctor, that's probably inadequate if they've got any kind of severity at all with the kid. And there's all kinds of other stuff that they do. So getting state and support services, that is very difficult. I happen to know about that because I had to do that for my son. So any empathy you can give them is great. We could probably, if we had a group, if we had more time, we could probably list a whole bunch of other stuff that they have to do. Again, though, one of the things they need to do is make sure they bring their kid to martial arts a couple times a week, which would be really valuable. And I mentioned that economic impact. That was just one of the studies from this week. It's a lot of economic impact. Again, because they have this economic impact, doesn't mean we don't charge them less. These are parents that are really valuing doing this for their kid. But just understand how this does impact will help you make sure you have a good conversation with them about what's going on with them. So implications, let's get into this for implications for instructors. And we're going to go through curriculum, instruction, sales, and everything pretty fast. I think Master Sanborn are going to have some comments here, and this addresses what the other question was and probably a lot of the questions you're going to have. Most kids with autism should be able to work with kids in a regular classroom. Most kids with autism should be able to work with kids in a regular classroom. The curriculum you need to make sure the curriculum is designed for kids. We've seen, and Master Laura and I do consulting with hundreds of schools. We've seen one problem for curriculum design is that people are teaching adults. I mean, they're teaching kids like they teach adults. They don't really understand the difference. Or probably even better said than this, is that the curriculum is just too doggone complicated for everybody.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean that within a couple months until they test for a belt, or 3 months, or if you're a jiu-jitsu school, it might be 6 months before they test for a belt. Doesn't matter. It should be just enough stuff that everybody should be able to handle it. I mean, you don't send people to first grade with the expectation that only 50% of them are going to be able to do it. Okay, so what we struggle with with our other hats on is our expectation should be that the curriculum that people get presented with should be enough that they can bite it off within that time period. So that's what's really important. So the curriculum needs to be designed with younger kids for our classes under 6 years old. Now, I say under 6, but really I mean ability level. So some 6-year-olds are as smart as an 8-year-old, and we put them with the 8-year-old. So in terms of ability level, if the kids are in the preschool kind of ability level, we call them tiny tigers in my school. Some people call them little dragons. You can call them whatever you want. Doesn't matter. So in that age group, they don't need to memorize. So they do all the material there with a leader. They're still learning the curriculum, but we're not requiring memorization. Some kids with autism, that structure fits. Even if they're 8 years old, even if they're 9, it doesn't matter. They would then go with that group. That won't make them feel ostracized. They'll be fine with that because there's other kids taller, shorter. We don't make a big deal out of this age group and you're with the younger kids. We just say this is this group. We call them tiny tigers. This is this group. These are karate kids. This is our family class where the families go to. So we separate it by ability grouping. And if they have memorization issues, they go with that group. If they can memorize stuff, they go with the other group. So this is something that makes it real easy. So as I said, they may be better suited to the Tiny Tigers class. Again, whatever you call your preschool class. Here's a case, an exception to that for the instructor that asked this. In some severe cases, some are very severe, and they may be really sensitive to noise. They may not even be able to come into the room. We will offer private lessons. And we do this in addition or instead of regular class. Our goal is to get them acclimated so that they can take regular class. And a key here is that identifying severe cases. If they can't make it through an introductory lesson, and we'll come to that in a little bit here because it's very important to do an introductory lesson. So if they can't participate in a regular class, we'll offer private lessons. And these private lessons we'll charge real rates for. We charge at least, they have to be part of our regular program. Master Sanborn, what are we charging for the leadership program and for private lessons now?
Leadership is $697 a month, and then private lessons are $100 an hour.
A half hour.
Half hour.
Right. So the child would be part of our leadership program, and they'd be paying $697 a month, and the private lessons would be like $100 for a half hour, and they would be scheduled for these. Now, we would don't get me wrong, we'll do a few private lessons with them. Sometimes we'll do a few private lessons with them just to get them acclimated, and we may not charge for that. we're pretty relaxed about that. We'll do a few, or if a kid needs a private lesson once in a while just to get them through some sort of difficulty so that they can acclimate into the class, that's fine. But if they're a pretty severe case and we have the time in our schedule, we will consider doing that if we can make it happen. And this doesn't mean they have to be with Master Sanborn. She doesn't have time to do those private lessons, but it would be with one of the other instructors that we have. My son's actually very good at working with them. But this is for more severe cases. In almost all, in fact, I think in every case we've ever had, very shortly thereafter, they're in with the regular class. Okay.
We've had the kids who have the extreme reaction to noise canceling headsets and so forth.
Oh, yes.
We've had parents who came in already prepared for that, but I've had, some of these noise canceling headphones now are very, very, very good in ear and over the ear. And that solved the problem as far as group class for a number of the kids.
You bet. That's a great example, sir. Yeah, and there's other ways to solve the problem too. Like even we'll talk about instruction next. So instruction in terms of tactics. Now this is how you deliver the class. One thing would be stuff like that. Be very aware of sounds and everything. One thing I was going to mention is reward system. So often if they have a discipline challenge, a lot of times with kids with autism, and a problem in the school is they're not following along. So your instructors who aren't trained well give them negative feedback because they're not following along. And it might not even feel like it's negative. It may just be, hey, look this way, or switch your foot, or, do something else that's negatively reinforcing them. And the instructors aren't even intentionally they're not being mean, or they're not trying to be mean, but it comes across as mean. And what we have to do with these kids is understand that they are going to get more, you're going to get more movement forward if you focus a lot on positive reinforcement. And we always say that, but my challenge would be to video your class and then think about how many times you correct a kid. These kids don't necessarily need correction when they first start. What they need is to be catching the things that they're doing right. Now, a concern I have that instructors ask me is, yeah, but if that kid's not behaving right, if he's got the wrong foot in front or he's doing something wrong, won't the other kids pay attention? Well, we're teaching discipline, right? So the other kids are supposed to be doing what you tell them to, whether or not another kid is paying attention. So if you do this right, it shouldn't matter what the kid with autism is doing in class. I'm not saying we don't want to correct them as we can, but we've got to really look for ways that they're doing things correctly, especially the more severe cases that you have. And one thing that's important is to have a reward system, some kind of star or stripe system in place for all the kids. And this is true for every kid. It's not just kids with autism. And one thing that's very critical is rewards need to be done, especially for younger kids or kids with autism, immediately. So in other words, if your reward is at the end of class, you tell everybody what a good job they did, or if your reward is when they come into the school, they fill out a little paper and the parent says what they did at home, all those are good. Do that. But you need to have something that gives them a reward like immediately. And part of that is verbally, part of that is giving them 5. Part of that is, although with kids with autism, sometimes they're sensitive about touch, but you can verbally reward them. You can give them 5. You can do other stuff. We use stickers. I have an example of stickers that we use. There needs to be reinforcement immediately when the behavior is presented. If that's not reinforced then the behavior doesn't generally move forward. It's just like any kind of training. And I don't want to use an example of training animals, but we're animals too. So any training you do needs to also include that. We're kind of running out of time. We got a lot to go over, so we're going to go a little bit over today. Go ahead, sir.
I might throw a couple of the questions at you to insert into this. We have, looks like Chris Reichert. I apologize if I mispronounced the name. But the specific question is, how do you feel about starting a special needs class to start with and then integrating those kids into regular class? This class could include children with Down syndrome, autism, developmental delays, etc. That's one for slotting in here somewhere. Another question, I think, by Mike Rowe is, how do you teach a advanced student on the autism spectrum how to be an effective instructor? Okay. And you, of course, had that experience with your with your son, who's a very good instructor.
Right. And let me address both of those. Are really two separate questions. First of all, I absolutely don't suggest having a special needs class. Yep. I don't suggest having a special needs curriculum. I don't suggest modifying. Now, we'll modify something. There's one student, it's not one of our students, that we know well, that doesn't have arms, that was born without arms. So they're not going to do the same curriculum. They're not going to do punches. You're going to modify curriculum if there's some reason to modify curriculum. But in this case, for kids with autism, we don't modify things. We want to have the same curriculum, the same classes, the same everything. The only modification is level of severity. We may have a private lesson to get them then acclimated. There are a couple reasons for that. One is, from a business point of view, you can't be running a whole bunch of different classes, because even if 10% of your kids had Down syndrome or autism, and by the way, all this stuff is still applicable with ADHD, with Down syndrome, with other special needs. So 100% of what we're talking about is 100% applicable in those cases. But the numbers wouldn't work out so that you can effectively have enough of those classes. And we don't want to have those classes because it won't properly acclimate them to then eventually be in with the other kids. It's different from elementary school. In elementary school,
it's very counterproductive for the kids themselves. The kids
absolutely.
With ADD.
Yeah, it's different in elementary school with special ed, which is what my Ph.D. is in. In special ed, if I'm trying to do math, I may have to have a one-on-one instructor with a kid with a certain developmental issue. So that's a different issue. We have the ability in our martial arts classes to not have to bring them in, and you've got all kinds of different kids. You've got different heights and different abilities to kick. Some of them kick high, some of them kick low. We had a 95-year-old guy that kicked about this high when he started and kicked about that high when he got his third-degree black belt. I mean, that was a big achievement. That was like 100%. Remember Bruce, Master Sanborn. Everything should be relative to what their ability level and their progress is. It doesn't mean we have low standards. We have very, very high standards. And so we want to have those high standards for these students. So having a separate class is, as you said, Master Oliver, counterproductive for those kids. As far as making them instructors, first job is to make them good martial artists. We don't put them in our instructor program unless they can handle it. Now, if they can handle the class, but then maybe, depending on their severity, we have quite a few instructors, people that are in our instructor program, that their severity of their what's going on with them, maybe they have Down syndrome. They may not be fully teaching a class. It wouldn't be fair for them or for the students for them to teach the class on their own, but they may be assisting a class, and they can do whatever level of instruction that they can do. If they can meet our very stringent requirements, and they are very difficult for them to certify as an instructor, which takes 3 years in our school, and they have to memorize a lot of stuff, and they have to do a lot of things. They have to do the same as everybody else, then great, they can certify. If they can only get to a certain level, that's fine too. And we love them just the same, and we want them to be to move on to the level of capability that they can move on to. So hopefully that answers that question. But they certainly have the ability. We give them the opportunity, and we work with them to be able to move up to different levels. But we don't lower our standards, if that's going to make sense to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully that fully answers it for those guys. These are stickers that we use. They're real small, and I have them in my uniform, and I use them a whole bunch in class. Again, the key is that rewards need to be when the behavior is presented. That's behavioral psychology 101. So let's talk about instruction really quick. So some tactics and techniques, and we're going pretty quick through this. And we really use the approaches, the same approaches we would use for little preschool kids, even if they're in the other classes. You may have, when we're standing and facing somebody, if I raise my left hand, I expect them to raise their right hand, so we mirror classes. If I had, an 8-hour seminar here, we'd be teaching all this stuff. Making sure the class is fun, making sure it's emotionally exciting, making sure that each of the techniques has a good descriptor so that they can learn it easily. These are different tactics that we use. Visual tools, making sure that they have pads and blockers. Most of you guys are already going to be using this. These are tactics you should be using. If you're using pads or targets, We like x-ray paper for them because they're not hitting something hard, so that when they hit something, they don't have any resistance. And just in case their technique isn't very good, they can learn the movement. They can learn the gross movements. Remember, as they're starting out, we want to first start out with gross movements, not fine motor skills. So visual tools are really important, but we don't do goofy things. So like, I don't recommend goofy things. By goofy things, I mean with the class, with the little kids, using bubbles and having them kick bubbles. You can save that for a parent night out or some other activity you do. We want the class to still be martial arts. So we don't want the class to be about, we don't want it to look like a playground. So everything we're doing is still going to be solid martial arts. Some kids, again, have sensitivities to sound, and the x-ray paper makes a lot of sound. If that's the case, then we'll use something else. Pool noodles are really good. We use those a lot, and those don't make any sound when you use them. What we do want to have is the kid can acclimate to sound. If they're so severe they need earmuffs or they need some noise canceling headset, that's fine. If they can acclimate, we want to try to do that, because they're going to be in environments where things are noisy. You know, the parents want to be able to take them bowling sometime, and it's noisy bowling. They want to take them to Disneyland. It's noisy at Disneyland. So this is a real big value for them. And by the way, occupational therapy, they do stuff like that. Sensory integration therapy, they do things like this. You just need to bring them along slowly. Don't let them go, you know, cold turkey to a big, loud, noisy class. More instructional stuff. We already mentioned this. They can get frustrated really easy if you overcorrect. So we're looking for positive behavior movement. If they can't get their correct foot in front, but they get a foot in front, it really don't matter that much. You know, you're going to reward them for getting the correct foot in front. What you're looking for, and what we always preach is, I want good black belts. I'm not looking for great white belts or orange belts or yellow belts or whatever you have. I'm looking for good black belts. And these kids will end up being really good black belts if they stay with you long enough. Now, you may keep them longer. It may take them 4 years to get a black belt that normally you do in 3 years, or 5 years to get it that you normally do in 4, because they're in your younger kids' class. But they're going to be good when they get to black belt. We also have some cases we want the parent there. So this is an important tactic to use. If the kid is more severe, even if he's not more severe, if you're just starting out with them, make sure the parent's staying in class. Because if there's a problem and we don't want to do this if we can avoid it. But if there's a problem and the kid needs to step out for a second, we want to make sure the parent or a caregiver is there so that we can have them removed from class. We don't want to have an instructor there watching the kid all the time. So the rule is not to have, you know, I've got a kid with autism in my school, so I've got to schedule another instructor there every time the kid shows up for class. That's a recipe for, you know, problems in your business, problems in your school. You want to be able to make sure that this works no matter what. It works with your regular business operations. Anything else to add there, guys?
No,
Nope.
I think that's good. The another question was in that line was whether you structure additional assistant instructors to be in the class when you know special needs kids are going to be there, and you know that's one of those, I think that should be fairly obvious, Master Moody, is you want to be looking at your support, and we typically have a lot of leadership development trainees and assistant instructors and black belt instructors who are going to be there based upon student teacher ratio and based upon classes that are a little bit more challenging or need a little bit of extra help, and you always want to be aware of that. I think a lot of school owners perhaps don't take just the extra bit of time to be looking at class by class each week, doing a little bit of planning on support and so forth. So obviously, I think the answer should be yes. You schedule your support based upon volume and which classes are going to be a little bit more challenging and have more opportunity.
Yeah, but we don't do it based on, we know we've got a kid with autism coming into class, or we know we've got these kids. We've always got some support people there because we've got a really strong leadership program and a really strong instructor program.
Exactly.
If you have that in your school, then that's a different problem to fix. If I'm stuck by myself and I've got 50 kids in class and a couple of them have autism, then we deal with it. And this rule, though, if the kid's more severe than we have, and by the way, that would apply with a kid with ADHD or other issues, we're not going to use the parent hardly at all. I mean, it rarely ever happens. I just taught a big class for Senior Master Carpiac up in Vancouver, and there were 50 kids in one of the classes. All the kids were fine. I didn't use the parents at all. But if the kid has some issues like this, especially with temper, they've got obsessive compulsive disorder, one of those kind of issues as well as autism, you want to communicate with the parent about you have that opportunity. And that might just be for a couple minutes to calm them down until you get started.
Yeah.
Facility. So I like to have, not everybody uses this. Some people have an objection to this, but I like to have spots on the floor, somewhere on the floor for them to stand. We use this for every student, though, the adults, everybody. And what that means is, hey, there's Grandmaster Jeff Smith. So we have a 10th degree black belt too. So I like to have someplace on the floor for them to stand so that everybody knows where to go. And again, this is good class control in general. You don't need to change anything else in your school. You don't need to hang up signs. You don't need to hang up, have other tools in your school. When I'm in an external facility, so if we get invited to go to a school, I watch for possible distractions if there's other noises. And the other thing we do is bring like some of that blue carpenter tape and put spots on the floor so that we make sure that all the kids know exactly where to stand. That helps us with class control. And that for these kids, especially if they know that they've got a particular spot to stand in, they're usually really, really compliant and really good about going there. So if you know what I'm talking about, it's just blue tape so it doesn't stick really well. And it's what you use for painting. And I just have a roll of that in my bag. And if I'm ever going to an external class and I'm going to teach, I just go stick on the floor about, 3-4 feet apart. And then we can control the class really, really well. And then there's probably a few other things you could do, but basically you don't make any changes to what you're doing already. Okay. So let's go fast. We're a little bit over time here. Try to wrap up. So parents, what we want to do with parents, and I mean by this, parents that aren't the parents of the kids with autism, they need to understand that your instructors work with lots of kids. If they see one of these kids in class and they go, well, hey, you're paying attention to that kid, not my kid. First of all, you should be making sure you pay attention to everybody. And second of all, occasionally we've had parents that say, well, hey, that kid didn't do as well as my kid and he still got his belt. You need to make sure that you educate the parents about what the goals are for each of them. It's not about, everybody has to kick above their head before they get their yellow belt. It's about them all making positive progress forward, and every kid has their own challenges, and every kid we want to push hard. In fact, we want to push your kid really hard, and he should be kicking over his head. So make sure that the parents are educated. If there's a kid, especially a severe kid, we've got one, Brady, who's in our school, I mentioned a minute ago. He's about 6 foot tall, maybe he's 6 foot tall. I mean, he's taller than me. And how old is he?
15.
Yeah, he's 15. So he's in the kids class. So, he's bigger and taller than everybody else in the kids class. But, he's not going to be, if the parents aren't educated, we don't say, hey, that kid's got autism. He's got a bunch of problems. We don't say it like that. But if any of the parents talk or ask us about it, we explain, yeah, we've got a lot of kids that we're working with, and this is what's going on with Brady. And his parents fine with that. So let's see. The other thing we want to make sure is, and really this is almost never a problem. Most of the time the other kids are very supportive and really happy. The one thing we've got to watch for, we don't have Brady punching another kid that's like 2 foot tall. So we watch for the kids' interactions, which we do anyway. This is your normal instruction anyway. Sometimes you got a kid with no diagnosis of anything and they still are too rough with other kids. So we've always got to watch that anyway. That should be your normal process 100% of the time. But with kids that are in, there's one case I'm mentioning, it's an obvious situation that there's something going on. The other kids are really great about being helpful and understanding. Not that we use them to help. It's still the instructor's job to do everything, but it makes it a much more positive environment. Okay, let's talk about sales a little bit. There's no significant difference. I've had some instructors go, well, they have autism, so I'm going to charge less. No, you charge this, we just do the same amount. If anything, we charge more if there was going to be a difference, but we're not. We just have it in the same sales process, so it's simple. Key point here, and Master Oliver and Master Smith and I will tell you this, you need to do one-on-one intro lessons with anybody. If you don't know the sales process to do this, again, go to martialartswealth.com. You get some free stuff and you can figure out how to do this, and we'll help you with it if it's a good fit. But you've got to do one-on-one intro lessons with students. When they walk in the door, that helps us evaluate whether they're ready or not to be in our program and if it's a good fit. So if you're not doing that, if you just toss kids into class and then hope for the best, and then at the end they come out and go, hey, sign up and enroll, that's not a good process. So we've got a real step-by-step enrollment process you can do in 1 or 2 introductory lessons, so the kids, we get to really understand the families and kids, the parents get to communicate with us. So this is really important. But we don't charge less, we charge the same. So you need to follow a good sales process and a good renewal and upgrade. These kids go into leadership like everybody else too. We have the same percentage, if not higher, of the kids with special needs go into our into our leadership program. Not always our instructor program, but into our leadership program for sure. So we usually have 80% or better go into our leadership program in terms of students that enroll with us. So, and that's, I would say, Master Sanborn, is that true? That more than that probably of the special needs kids?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely more than that.
Yeah, because the parents for those kids want the other kind of development that we're providing.
Yeah, and I've been a little uncharacteristically quiet here, Master Moody, but let me chip in on that. Is the kids who are on the autism spectrum or ADD, ADHD, that's an easier enrollment and an easier renewal because the parents are looking for, in almost all cases, looking for support, looking for backstop, and assuming your staff is relatively well educated on how to talk to them and how to deal with those students, it's an easier renewal long term, and the parents are more incentivized to make sure the child is in class and continuing to follow through with the process.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw somebody in the question say something about, not putting a kid that's got some challenges in a special class, and that's not supposed to make them feel good. And it actually is going to make them feel much better. The parents of kids where their kid can learn to be in with a regular class, they feel fantastic. They're much happier with their kid learning to be. Imagine your kid has got challenges. When I learned my kid had autism and was diagnosed with that, I was in tears. I was crying. I'm a grown man. I'm crying because my kid may not live a normal life, may not have the ability to do the stuff that the other kids could do. And when he was able to do, and by the way, when he was going to go into our karate program, I was afraid of putting him in there, even though I already had, I think, 5 schools at that time. I was afraid of putting him in our leadership program because he couldn't speak. He couldn't talk. He spoke gobbledygook. Then I put him in that program, and it's been amazing what it's done for him and all these things I've gotten out of it for him. And let me tell you this, if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't be where he is today. I know that. But I was afraid too. And if he, and him being with the other kids and see him in class, even the first month of doing that was amazing for me. The parents will absolutely appreciate that you're teaching their kid to then be with the other kids and perform with the other kids. So that's going to make them feel very special. And the kids like it too. So anyway, let's move on. Again, private lessons, we already talked about this. We don't let anybody do private lessons in the school unless they're already paying for leadership. They have to be in the leadership program. So the fee for private lessons is in addition to their regular fee. Don't do this for free, guys. There are certain cases where we might help an organization out. Maybe the clinic that I talked to, when they referred people, we gave them a discount on their way in. They got a discount off the initial installment when they paid, so they got a discount on the front end. But they still pay regular rates because these parents are very motivated. And believe me, when you're charging regular rates for lessons, they're going to be more engaged. You don't want to be the thing that they drop out when they get tired. If you're doing it for free, they'll just not show up. So it's got to be significant for them, and it should matter in your business. So marketing, let's talk about this. Referral systems work better if parents know that you do work with the kids. So now they'll refer the other kids because they see the other kids in class. They know you'll work with a kid with ADHD or with Down syndrome or with autism or with these other things. So if they don't know that, if they do know that, they're going to they know, their friend's kid has some problems, they're going to refer them to you. External marketing, there's lots of groups. We love Autism Speaks. They're a really good group. They say good things. They have good data on what they preach about and talk about. They have local autism walks, sometimes with like 10,000 people. So in your town, if you go to autismspeaks.org, you can find out when they have an autism walk. If you ever need to know how to have a booth there, Master Smith, Master Oliver, and I are experts at that. We've had people get 100 appointments from one of these kind of events. Very recently, this week, in fact, we probably had that. So this is a fantastic way to market. And you're not going to get appointments from just kids with autism. You're going to get from the entire population, because people that go to these walks just want to support the cause. That's a really good organization. You can connect with local community programs. Here's another organization, Autism Society with a hyphen there, is a great organization too. Be careful of all the ones you work with. If they say things that we've told you are not true about, diet and other things, then they're probably not the most reputable organization looking at the most reputable data. Clinics, like there's medical clinics that specialize in kids with special needs. I go schedule time to talk to their staff about what we can do for them. And then if they refer people to us, we're a good source. They don't ask for any money in return. They very often, the first time I ever did this, the occupational therapist said to me, I always refer people to karate, but I never knew who to send them to. So guess what? Now. And I gave them all of our information so that they knew exactly who to send them to. And then other charity work. We can also help you with how to do that. And you can raise money for these charities and get into schools, get into organizations, get into businesses by working with these kind of groups. Other family members, if you have a family member that has one of these kind of things going on, then you can work with them as well. Okay, we're going to wrap up real quick. We only got a couple minutes. So some research, I wanted to mention bullying and autism, because that's one of my other expertises. Some various studies about more than twice as many kids with the rates of bullying are about over twice as many kids with autism get bullied. Okay, this was a pretty recent study. And usually, I don't know what I was spelling there, increased. Usually it increased when they had, when they were different ethnic groups than the area they were in, if they had ADHD or social issues. So this increased the rate of bullying that went on. They were higher in terms of kids that bullied and were getting bullied. It's called bully victims in the bullying field. So that was quite a bit higher. That's about almost 50% higher. And also, I hate to tell you guys this, but kids with autism bully kids more. One study in 2007 showed it was about twice as much. I must have been tired when I wrote this slide, because there's like a bunch of typos in it. So if they had ADHD and ADD, those kids, if they have autism, tended to bully other people more too. So it's things you've got to watch for when you work with kids with autism, that there may be more bullying going on. If you want to work on bullying more, which is a really important topic in martial arts, one of the things we found out in my dissertation was about twice as many kids come to you as white belts that are being bullied. We're going to do a seminar on June 12th, another webinar at 10 a.m., so an hour earlier than we started this time. And maybe we need to schedule an hour and a half for it, because we're going over on this one. It's very good. Master Oliver, your guys have all gone through a lot of that with me. We've got some new research as well in that webinar. So that's going to be going on June 12th. So I'm going to be sending out some emails on that so you guys can register. But that's going to be another one that we're going to do pretty soon. Okay, so to wrap up today, hopefully you guys have covered everything that you could know in an hour and a half on social and communication issues with bullying. These are where they have issues, and then the implications for us in these areas. It really should be something that you don't have to change your curriculum unless you've already got some curriculum issues. If you're having trouble teaching them, you probably just have too much curriculum in your school. In instruction, gave you some tactics. All those tactics can be used in your regular kids and younger kids classes anyway. In terms of sales, you ought to be doing, if you're doing your sales correctly, you really don't have to change anything. In some minor cases, there may be some severe cases where you do private lessons with them. Again, you should charge real rates for this, because you're especially now with all the stuff that you just committed to, those of you on the webinar, you've covered you know, a lot of things. So you're a well-trained instructor. You should be paid properly for that. And then I gave you some marketing tips that can work like gangbusters. You can get a lot of members from going out in the community, especially the autism walks, especially community events. Those are things also that you should get some help with. We can help you with as well. So you should have a great time with these kids. Last thing is what to do. So I said get the to-do list out. We have most everybody that started on the webinar are still here. So you can go to, I think everybody should make sure they go to Marshall, oh, my pen didn't work. So Martial Arts Wealth. .com. Make sure you go there, and there's some free stuff there that you can get. You should get all that the free resources, and then if we can work with you as well. And then you can also go for your online marketing. Go to karate/2019 and get everything you're doing evaluated. It doesn't cost anything. Neither of these things cost anything. These are our sponsors, so we really appreciate them helping. You should also make sure for the list you do some outreach. That should be on your list. That should be on your list. So you go out and do some outreach with community groups and community members that you can work with autism. And then internally, make sure that the curriculum and instruction kind of follows the rules that we talked about as well. So I hope that was really valuable for everybody. Certainly you guys can give me some feedback. If you fill out the survey that I'll send out afterwards, we'll send some other resources and a copy of the symptoms of autism and some other pieces that will go along with this so that you guys can get some extra backup material about it. Do we have any last questions? I guess there's some things flashing here.
You know, I think we have hit most everything. That was a question, other than a couple about how you find X-ray papers nowadays and stuff like that from the relevance standpoint. I might just say, you know, there's a lot of familiar names that I haven't talked to in a while that I'd love to catch up with. Robert Serrano, Lou Ann Yee, Randy Cooligan, Thomas Wright. You know, of course, a bunch of our current active members I've talked to even within the last couple of days. But thanks everybody for jumping in here. And again, if you go to martialartswealth.com, you'll get a bunch of free stuff. And I'd love for you to work with my assistant Bob to schedule a time for talking to myself and Master Smith. And Master Moody, we have a couple schools that I've just talked to today that are having great results with Go To Karate. I know our Mile High Karate School in Westminster has been getting an awful lot of lead traffic, way up over what they were doing before. So really everybody should take advantage of that. And I know we could have gone another 12 hours, but great material, Master Moody. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks everybody, Master Sanborn, Master Oliver, and Grandmaster Smith is over in the corner there. People I really appreciate spending time here. I'm looking forward to the bullying prevention one on June 12th. It's gonna be at 10 a.m. So everybody put that on their calendar that's here. So I will be spending out some material on that pretty soon. And once I get a break once I recover from doing this one, then we'll get that sent out and everything. Okay. Thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great rest of your week.
Thank you guys.
Bye everybody.